First of all, let me make it clear that this video is not a wish list of any kind, nor is this some kind of prediction video for the next expansion. It is just me making changes to the current jobs in Endwalker completely based on my personal preferences. I don't have any experience in game design, so don't take it too seriously. This is just me sharing some of my thoughts, and feel free to share yours in the comments. Thank you. Let's first lay some groundwork for how I'm approaching updating the tanks. There are several things I am unhappy with how some of the jobs are currently designed, and the first issue that really comes to my mind is with job identity. The game currently functions in a DPS meta, where all jobs from all roles are essentially seen as a different form of DPS. This is most likely due to how the game only really allows a maximum of 8 people in a team. And with the smaller size, the responsibility of doing damage and clearing the fight had to be shared by the roles that traditionally did not need to be burdened with, if they wanted to clear things faster and more efficiently. This creates the incentive to have everyone in the group to do damage, as every bit of it counts. And the faster you clear, the less chance there will be for people to make fatal mistakes, especially when the game really does punish you for messing up mechanics. Essentially, due to the 8-player size limit and the punishing mechanics, more DPS literally leads to faster and safer clears. And just to do a little comparison, the reason why things like World of Warcraft raids basically never expects a healer or tank to be doing any kind of big damage is because there are so many other DPS in the raid group. Usually there are like 10 DPS versus only about 2 tanks and 3 healers. The extra DPS players can easily make up for whatever small damage numbers non-DPS roles may be able to contribute. So it becomes a situation where it's just better to just let the tanks focus on the tanking mechanics and healers focus on the healing mechanics, because their DPS simply won't amount to anything substantial anyways. However, it is also because of this distribution of DPS responsibility that is affecting how non-DPS roles are being designed. The tanks certainly feel great when you perceive them and play them as DPS, but they're severely lacking when it comes to fulfilling that fantasy of being an actual tank. When people often complain about tank homogenization, they aren't exactly complaining about the DPS rotation, but the literal homogenization of the tanking aspect of the job role. All tanks have literally the same tank buster defensive ability, the very similar raid protection, and the very similar spam protection. When I first mentioned wanting to improve Final Fantasy XIV's job identity issue, this is kind of what I meant. It is both because of the lack of signature abilities and real tanking mechanics in the current game that made them feel very samey. So my approach to updating the jobs, not just for the tanks, will basically be like this. Identify the theme of the job and have the job's actions reflect the set theme. This means that if the current playstyle of the job does not fit what I think is the theme of the job, then it is likely that it will have much bigger changes compared to others. We'll get a bit more into the details when talking about the specific jobs, so let's just begin. And let's start with Paladin. The main theme and gameplay style of the job is, I think, switching between using spells and weapon skills. And I think in its current form, it's actually done pretty well, especially with the introduction of the Confiteor combo in Endwalker. Both of Paladin's general gameplay and visual aesthetics are honestly really good. However, the current Paladin seems to have put too much emphasis on the spellcasting aspect of the job, where it sometimes feels like the whole point of the job is just to wait for Rekiscat's cooldown to come off. I understand that the Confiteor combo is supposed to be the signature action for the job, so I won't really be touching that at all, but I do want to try to instead change up the weapon skills a bit in order to bring them more into the spotlight to balance things out a bit. The Confiteor combo can remain as the standard burst you do every 60 seconds, but the rest simply has to be brought up a notch. The first change to Paladins is actually going to be done on Fight or Flight. Currently, it is just being used as a DPS cooldown, mostly for buffing your Confiteor combo, which I think is just too simple of an ability that does way too much. This is quite a shame because this ability used to buff only physical damage, but now the physical part of the job is almost completely neglected and nothing really interacts with it anymore. So what I'll do with Fireflight is to actually make it something similar to Rekiscat, where it will grant 4 stacks, and stacks will only be consumed by certain weapon skills that are turned into improved versions under this effect, which include the basic 1, 2, 3 combo and Goring Blade. And the improved versions will basically just do some extra damage, while Goring Blade will get an extra dot as well. And the improved weapon skills will now cost additional MP to cast, 500 MP for each part of the 1, 2, 3 combo, totaling 1500 MP, and Goring Blade costing 1000 MP. We're basically doing a bit of a rollback for Fireflight to help the weapon skills not be just fillers for you to wait for the next Rekiscat, but actually have something unique to themselves, while also adding some extra flavor for the ability itself, making it interact with the job in more ways than just improving damage. And the reason behind why I want to add MP cost to the weapon skills is honestly very simple. Paladins just have too much MP laying around. The second part of the 1, 2, 3 combo, Riot Blade, restores 1000 MP, and the 3 casts of Atonement totals 1200 MP restoration, while the job itself doesn't even use mana that much. So I think having more things that cost MP just makes more sense in general. Now the next action I want to change is actually going to be Goring Blade. It is literally just a damage button with a 60-second cooldown, and I really don't like things like that. It is fine to have something so simple at lower levels, but for jobs at max level, I think they're supposed to be like the complete version of the job, where all parts of the job should be working together, more like a machine rather than a bunch of disconnected parts. And I think it is really simple to improve this weapon skill as well. Just simply have an enhanced trait that makes Goring Blade grant a stack of Rekiscats upon use, and that's all I think it needs. It is not that I want every Paladin action to be interacting with each other, but Goring Blade just feels particularly isolated. And there are 2 more actions that are kind of like that: Expansion and Circle of Scorn. Circle of Scorn is apparent enough, it's just an AoE dot. What I think it should be instead is something similar to Dark Knight's Salted Earth, but one that follows you around and does damage with every tick. And in later levels, it gets improved to also be granting some extra blocking chance. Expansion is, I think, a particularly weird one. You basically get it at level 30 as Spirits Within, and it gets upgraded into Expansion at level 86. And you get the trait Chivalry at level 58, where it grants Riot Blade and Spirits Within their MP effect, despite not having anything worthwhile to use MP on. I kind of see this ability as having the same role as Dark Knight's Carve and Spit, where the MP gain is like its main effect. But because of how little Paladins actually use their MP compared to Dark Knight, the effect really feels a lot less impactful than it probably should be. Though I think the problem is actually already somewhat fixed with the new Fireflight we introduced earlier, so the MP gain now actually would make a bit more sense. But I think Holy Spirit and Holy Circle should just be granted at lower levels. As mentioned in the beginning, the biggest problem about tanks is their lack of tank identity. So let's take a look at their defensive abilities and see what we can do there. In terms of tank utility, the main features I think a Paladin should have are blocking using their shield and healing using their spells. But we can see that the current Paladin doesn't really fulfill any of these things. Currently, Paladins are the only shield bearers in this game, so it is the only job that can utilize the block mechanic. You would think that as the only job that can block, it would be utilizing this mechanic a lot, yet only 2 actions ever actually mention it. So this is definitely something that needs to be touched upon. And in terms of healing, it really is just kind of sad. The spell Clemency is actually a pretty big heal that heals not only your teammates but yourself as well. And you would think that this is going to be a very valuable asset in terms of team utility. However, because it is a spell that uses a GCD, which can mess up the rotation and make you lose damage, it is usually not advised to use this spell at all. Instead, the healing mostly comes as a kind of a bonus effect, given on top of your usual tanking abilities, like Holy Sheltron, Intervention, and Divine Veil. Even Holy Spirit has a bit of self-heal now, so there's even less of a reason for Clemency to exist. As you can see, there are quite a few things that we need to go through. Now the good thing is that we don't really need the tanking abilities to be doing crazy combos or interactions with each other, so we can just make changes to them one by one individually, without having to worry about how it would interact with your other abilities. First up, let's update Clemency. Now, Clemency not being used is actually more of a fundamental issue with the game itself, where the combat system design is essentially discouraging you to use it. So I think for situations like this, we can just make it work with the system instead, and just turn it into an ability that you can use it while weaving every once in a while. But it would lose the effect of healing 50% to yourself when casted on another party member. This extra effect will instead becomes a bonus effect if this ability is used when the Paladin has above 50% MP. As mentioned before, Paladins don't use MP as much as Dark Knights do, and that is honestly kind of fine. But in order to make MP a more relevant resource for the job, I think this above 50% clause would make some abilities just a bit more interesting. So what this means is that Holy Spirit and Holy Circle will also be losing their healing effect when you use them under Divine Might or Requiescat. This healing effect will instead be gained through simply having MP above 50%. Now, let's move on to the next ability, Holy Sheltron. And here's something for a change of pace. I actually really like how Endwalker gave all the tanks their spam tanking ability a little reward for timing it well, where you get some extra mitigation as a bonus. And Holy Sheltron even has a bit of a regen effect added on top. And this is going to be a rare one, but I think Holy Sheltron is going to just remain unchanged. And this is going to be the same for Intervention as well, as it also has the unique effects where it actually interacts with Paladin's other tanking abilities, increasing its mitigation power if you have Sentinel or Rampart active. These are just some really cool and well-designed abilities, so no complaints here. Divine Veil. The healing effect of this ability is honestly my biggest complaint. The usual timing of when you use this ability is kind of awkward, as it is usually used before some kind of AoE damage comes down, so the healing just gets completely wasted here. But since this ability is usually used with other healing abilities, and there usually is some kind of follow-up healing after the AoE has come down, we can just switch this effect to increasing healing potency instead. Something similar to Scholar's Fey Illumination. Sentinel. All tanks have this same 30% damage mitigation. It really is just another roll action at this point. But I kinda want these abilities to be a bit more than what they are now. I want them to be the next big thing that gives the tanks their identities, other than their invulnerabilities. Since the main tank feature of Paladins is block, and block itself is already a 20% mitigation, we can first make Sentinel just take over Bulwark's effect, granting 100% block rate. Now, my main goal with updating these big tanking abilities is to try to keep the 30% mitigation, but have that 30% mitigation be presented or achieved in different ways. And for Sentinel, the missing 10% mitigation will be made up by this new effect, where while under Sentinel's effect, you get a free Sheltron or a Holy Sheltron use. Now the math might not be perfect here, but I think overall when you average things out, this would probably be a buff for the ability instead of a nerf. And since now Bulwark got its effect stolen, it will instead have the new effect of just having a flat 10% mitigation. And Bulwark will still increase block chance, but will only increase it to 60%. Now for the final two abilities, Passage of Arms and Cover. And I think there really isn't anything in need of changing for them. Passage of Arms is already a really iconic ability for Paladins. Maybe it could get some visual upgrade where the special effect could give some more emphasis on the shield, but honestly both with its current gameplay effect and the theming and the visual effects, the ability is pretty top tier. Now Cover is a weird one because I actually don't really like the current state of this ability. It really is just a relic from the past and it rarely gets used these days, if any at all. The idea behind the ability is nice, but under the current environment, it is just an extremely niche ability that almost no mechanic will require you to use it. But at the same time, it is also just niche enough that I don't want to touch it either, as I personally really can't think of any new effect that would do it justice. I think this is more of an issue with how fights are designed nowadays rather than there being a problem with the ability's effect itself. But the end result is I can't think of anything to do with Cover, so it will stay as it is now. And that's everything I want to do with Paladins. A lot of these changes could just be introduced at later levels as traits, so this is also a good opportunity for the traits to be more interesting as well, as some of them are really kind of underwhelming. And with the max level being at 90 currently, soon to be 100, there needs to be things that will make the leveling process feel more rewarding. And I think slowly introducing gameplay upgrades is a great way to do it. Overall, this job is actually one of the easier ones to do because of how its base kit is already kind of good and doesn't really need many changes. Especially 1/3 of the job, the spell casting aspect was left almost completely unchanged. And for the defensive, it was really only a bunch of side grades instead of anything substantial. The biggest change was definitely on fight or flight, but I think overall it was still relatively manageable and wasn't anything too big of a revamp. So the next job is going to be Warrior. Again, this one is also going to be relatively simple. You might think that because of how simple a job Warrior is compared to others, I might want to do some big changes with it, but actually it's going to be the exact opposite. In fact, I think the simplicity of the job could even be considered as part of its identity. It's not as flashy as the other jobs, but its rawness and straightforwardness are not really negative features that I think should be changed. Instead, I would consider them more as a core feature that makes this job unique and stand out from the rest. In terms of offensive capabilities, the only thing this job needs to do is just Fell Cleave. It doesn't need any other fancy combos or resource management. Just do the basic combos and use Infuriate on cooldown, and it's just as simple as that. Fell Cleave is indeed just a pure damage action, but I think in this context it also fully embodies what this job is all about. Simple and straightforward. With the current Warrior, how their job identity is being presented is not really that badly done either.
I got Equilibrium. No healing needed. No healing needed. Get your fucking heals off me.
Right now, I think Warrior is kind of defined by their healing capabilities, with Bloodwetting healing for each weapon skill hit, Equilibrium being a huge healing ability, and Throw of Battle increasing the received healing amount. Even the basic combo finisher, Storm's Path, does some pretty decent healing on its own. Not to mention Shake It Off has this AoE regen effect on top that it also grants a base healing amount. In this aspect, Warrior actually feels a bit similar to Paladin, as Paladin spells also usually have a lot of healing attached to it. So in order to make a clear distinction between the two jobs, I'm actually going to do a bit of a retroactive change here. All the healing effects, other than Clemency, will be AoE healing instead, and the healing amount will be moderately weakened. Warriors will now be more focused on doing self-healing, while Paladins will be more focused on party healing. Giving Warriors more self-healing also makes sense thematically, as currently when compared to Paladins and even Gunbreaker's main tanking ability, Bloodwedding's pure mitigation is actually quite weak. But this difference is easily made up by the amount of healing that the job has, and I think this distinction is actually done really well, further emphasizing the almost kind of pureness the job has. With this much healing, I think the only next step that would make sense is to add effects that will actually interact with their HP, a bit similar to how Paladin interacts with MP. We actually already kind of have that in PvP version of Warrior, so I don't really see why we can't have something similar in PvE as well. So first of all, Storm's Eye. Very simple update. It's also going to have the effect of increasing max HP by 10%. Now, because this weapon action is also a combo finisher, I feel like for combo finishers, they should represent what a job is really about. And just increasing damage by 10% doesn't really say enough about what exactly the main feature of the job is. And considering that we are going to do more things with HP management for Warrior, having a bit of extra HP for the job is, I think, a good thing. Next up, Aragony. It's just the AoE version of Upheaval, which is pretty disappointing for a level 86 ability. And even the visuals are a bit out of place, where Aragony makes you drop your weapon and start swinging with arms when all your other attacks utilize your axe instead of dropping it. So this is what the new Aragony is going to be. It's basically going to be a complete new revamp. First of all, it's going to have a 10% HP cost, and it will no longer deal damage by itself. Instead, in order to make sense of you dropping your weapon with this ability, you would enter a kind of rage mode where your AoE combo becomes improved, and you just do arm swings left and right while under the Aragony effect. The left swing will apply heavy, which reduces movement speed, and the right swing will apply slow, which will reduce auto attack speed. The ability will no longer be sharing a recast timer with Upheaval, as I really don't see how these abilities relate to each other in the first place, and with the changes done to Aragony, it's basically become something you will only use in AoE scenarios anyways, and the AoE purpose of the ability gets to remain unchanged. After talking about Aragony, let's talk about Upheaval. It's also going to have the added HP cost of 10%. It will mostly be doing the same, it will deal damage, and this next part is where I will take a bit of inspiration from the PvP version of the job, where it will actually deal increased damage if you use it while HP is at a high percentage, maybe like above 50%. And the reason for this huge leeway is because in PvE content, you can't really control your HP that well. And in a lot of cases, the cooldown of the ability might have come off, but you just took a huge tank buster and you really don't have the HPs to spare to get the bonus. So we'll leave a huge leeway for the warrior to get the bonus. And that's kind of it for the DPS rotation of the job. Again, I don't really want to change anything about Felcleave and the things around it, so all other abilities like Infuriate will just remain untouched, and Beast Gauge generation will also stay the same. Now for the defensives. Similar to Paladin's Holy Sheltron and Intervention, no big changes will really be made for Bloodwedding and Nascent Flash, but they will have the added cost of 15% of HP. The shield will be slightly weakened, and to compensate for the cost and the shield nerf, a small regen effect will be added. Shake It Off. We're just going to add a 10% HP cost and that will be it. This is a great ability that interacts with other tanking abilities, a bit similar to Paladin's Intervention, and it does pretty good healing, which is what this job is all about anyways, so the effects can just remain unchanged. If anything, the added cost probably made this ability a lot more balanced than it is right now. Vengeance. In order to make this tank buster mitigation reflect the job's identity more, the flat mitigation percentage will first be nerfed to be only giving 10%. The ability will also now cost 20% of max HP, but will immediately grant a shield that is worth half of your max HP, along with a pretty big regen effect to cover the cost. And guess what? That's going to be it for Warrior. I have basically changed nothing about the job's gameplay, unlike Paladin or many other jobs I will go through in the future, because Warrior, as a job that you basically pick at the beginning of character creation, should be kept relatively simple. And I think for all roles, there should be at least one job that is like the entry-level job to get you used to the general playstyle of the role. And I think Warrior is a great example of what a self-sufficient tank is like. And this is it for part 1 of the tank changes. I am separating this into 2 parts because the other 2 really require some extended explaining to do, and they will go through some pretty big changes, particularly with Dark Knight, as I am really unhappy with the job placed currently. Nonetheless, thank you for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed this video, and see you next time.